Hello, welcome once again to the Go for Ball podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life, and talking about some hitter trends, who's hot, who's not, who we're playing, who we're not playing, the guys you want to have in your lineups, the guys that aren't worth paying for, and everything in between. Give you an idea of where you're going this week and moving forward. So, as always, starting off at catcher. Not a lot of guys at catcher. Same old story here, really. You got Stephen Vogt, got off to that really hot start. It's not that he's been bad recently, but he hasn't been nearly as hot as he was. Buster Posey, kind of the opposite, was cold, then he got hot. He's producing at a fine level now. Excuse me. And then, those are your two options most nights, except for when Russell Martin is at home against a bad righty. You love to target him. He's up to 274 in the season, 9 homers, 33 runs, 28 RBIs, and that's a Toronto team that does a ton of damage, especially at home.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you nailed 3 guys that we're playing most nights if we're paying up at all. Posey, Vogt, and Russell Martin. I mean, outside of that, there hasn't been a ton else. I mean, you'll get some decent home run totals out of Salvador Perez and Brian McCann in the right matchup, but overall they haven't been outstanding. Perez has been okay, but hitting low in the lineup, he only has 18 runs scored, 28 RBI on 9 home runs. Isn't fantastic. He's only walking 2% of the time, so there's just not a lot there outside of those home runs for him and a decent batting average. With McCann, he's got 38 RBI, so he's been in a good spot with his 9 home runs. He's a guy you just look for against a weak righty at home, like we always talk about, and he's a decent option then. You can pretty much ignore him any other time, though.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Sal Perez, he's that guy that you only play as like a filler in tournaments because he's almost minimum salary, FanDuel especially. Too pricey everywhere else, and like a guy like Yadier Molina, even when he was in Coors, I didn't play him a single time because he's just got 0 power now, .051 ISO. I mean, it just has no upside, and I know he's been priced really low, especially on FanDuel, another one of those guys that's been at min salary, but I mean, for my money, if your upside is get a double and maybe there's someone on base, then you're not even worth rostering for me. So I mean, he's even at min salary, just not a guy that I ever play.
No, I'm not a big fan either. I mean, like you said, 0 home runs, 20 RBI. He's playing basically every day and hitting 279. I mean, 12 runs scored. Not a guy that's going to score even when he gets on the bases. I mean, just not a lot of DFS potential there while he's a great real-life player.
Yeah, which is frustrating, especially considering that's a really good team, too. I mean, one of the better offenses in the league, especially against righties. But, oh well. Personally, I'm not a big fan of his either, so it doesn't break my heart too much to not have Yadier Molina on my DFS teams. Moving on to first base here, the guy who may quite be the front runner for MVP if it wasn't for Bryce Harper. Paul Goldschmidt having a monster season now, up to 17 homers, 49 RBIs, 46 runs scored, and 9 stolen bases. Walk rate of 18.5%, 316 ISO, 349 average. I mean, this guy is having a ridiculously good season, and he's priced like it now everywhere. But for a while there, I mean, you only saw him priced up against a lefty. Now he makes for a great tournament option because, I mean, he's unplayable in cash. Not that he's not going to pay off his salary, but, I mean, you got to do a hell of a lot to pay off that big tag most nights.
Yeah, definitely. And he's just been, so much better than everyone else. Only, I think, Albert Pujols has as many home runs as he does, and Pujols is hitting, almost 100 points lower, something like that.
Yeah,
and nowhere near. I mean, he's almost 20 RBI and runs back. He's got 8 stolen bases, more than Pujols does. I mean, he's just been the best first base option among quite a few good ones, honestly, but no one anywhere near his production at this point. I think he's the only guy that has both 40 runs scored and 40 RBI at first base right now. There's a couple other guys with over 40 RBI, but no one anywhere near him in runs scored. I think Freddie Freeman is probably second on the list among first basemen with 39.
Yeah, which is it's still a pretty big drop-off considering.
Yeah.
So, right behind him, your obvious guys, Anthony Rizzo is a guy who's been producing at a really high level, not quite Goldschmidt level, but at a much more affordable price, especially on FanDuel. You can get him for about $1,000 cheaper most nights. So, especially when he's at Wrigley, I mean, really with him, I mean, same thing with Goldschmidt. Lefty, righty, it doesn't matter. You love playing him. He's got a higher walk rate than he does strikeout rate, 10 stolen bases. Another thing, power hitter with 10 stolen bases. That's rare. 11 homers, 36 runs, 37 RBIs. Another one of those guys. Like, he's like the Paul Goldschmidt Jr. As if you need to save a little bit of money. I mean, he's got similar numbers, just not quite as much power. But I mean, he's a similar type of hitter. He's the kind of guy who comes up to a plate and you don't want to pitch to him.
Yeah, I mean, he's the one guy on the Cubs really that doesn't strike out a lot. He's only got an 11.2% strikeout rate. So while his walk rate's higher at 12.7, I mean, he's the opposite of a lot of these other Cubs hitters that see a ton of pitches. He's a guy that tries to get his pitch earlier in the count and hit it. And, I mean, he's hitting it to the tune of 327 right now with 11 bombs. So he's looking great. And then right after him, we got Miguel Cabrera, who, as usual, having a really nice season, hitting 325, 12 home runs, 39 RBI. He's having a quality year, but, I mean, almost really paling in comparison to those top two guys.
Yeah, I mean, and Cabrera, there's no surprise there. He's doing what he's always done and what he's going to continue to do until he finally drops off. So, no surprise. I mean, Adrian Gonzalez still having a fine year, but I don't want to say he's necessarily struggled, but he more often than not recently has not been really worth his price tag. So, he's a guy that, as his price keeps dropping, you can certainly consider him like in cash games more now than he works. He's under 4K most places, but all in all, still having a nice season. And then a couple spots below him, you got Eric Hosmer, who just continues to have a good season under the radar. Not a ton of power, 170 ISO. He's got 7 home runs, but 36 RBIs, 33 runs. Another one of those guys that you love to target in tournaments just because no one ever plays the Royals. And, I mean, that's just a good lineup top to bottom. They're like the Cardinals of the American League, where you can't pinpoint the one guy, but the team produces a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Really similar in that case. That's a really good comparison there. Another guy that's having a great year, Joey Votto, just coming off that big game really early in the week. Up to 13 home runs now, 35 RBI, hitting 298. A guy that walks quite a bit. He's just been a really solid cash game play all year, especially with his price sitting pretty low prior to that really big 3 home run game the other day. His price has been up a little bit since then. I think it'll regulate back to where it was, where you can play him most of the time in cash games again, and he's going to continue to be a really solid player in that respect.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, his price. I mean, as you see the second home run go out, I was a little worried about his price, and then you see the third one, you just know you can't play him for the next 3 days because his price is going to go up so high after that, and it did. And it's like you said, it's gone down a couple hundred here, but good games, not great games, will help keep that around 4K most places, and that'll be nice. But a couple other guys. Jose Abreu, I mean, he's having a fine season. Still not quite what we expected out of him, but I mean, if you look at his numbers and don't compare them to these top guys, 11 homers, 31 runs, 37 RBIs, and a really bad White Sox offense, batting .283. I mean, those are good numbers in most scenarios, but what really hurts him is there's no one ever on base. There's nobody that hits behind him, so his runs and RBI production is going to be down. I mean, the fact that he even has the numbers he has, as bad as that lineup has been, is pretty impressive in itself.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's nothing you can really point out and complain about with him, but there's also nothing that you can point out and you're really impressed by it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's a guy that I haven't played very much just because, like you said, with the offense around him, there's just not a lot of upside there right now. I mean, you need him to do all the work for you if you're playing him, and you don't have to deal with that when you're talking about a guy like Miguel Cabrera or Adrian Gonzalez or Eric Hosmer, like we mentioned. Even the Reds have come around a little bit with Brandon Phillips hitting at the top of the order really well, who I'm sure we're going to get to at second base here for Joey Votto. So a lot of that is factoring in the price with what guys are doing around him. And one guy that's really benefited from the Yankees having a really nice season is Mark Teixeira. His batting average is only .245, but he's got 45 RBI on 17 home runs, 30 runs scored. He's walking a decent amount because they've got some good bats behind him. I mean, there's no one really at this point in their career that's special on the Yankees outside of maybe Jacoby Ellsbury when he's been healthy hitting leadoff. Outside of that, I mean, they're just all doing their jobs, and it's turned into a pretty good offense.
Yeah, and they're definitely not missing Robinson Cano. I mean, he certainly wouldn't be helping him right now.
No, definitely not.
Another guy that we'll get to in it, but I mean, like you mentioned with Teixeira, I mean, his power has been off the charts this year. 323 ISO and just a 205 batting average on balls in play. I mean, that, like we've been saying for a couple weeks, he's another one of those guys, he's hitting well enough that, his average is going to continue to creep up. And I think it was in 220, 230 range over the past couple weeks, slowly getting up there. But, I mean, you're not playing Teixeira to get you 3 singles. You're playing him because he's got that power, especially at home at Yankee Stadium. Edwin Encarnacion, another guy, struggled with injuries. He's had a couple of those patented hot streaks he has, batting .228. Another one of those guys where if this was season long fantasy, you'd be pissed off about his 228 batting average. But in daily, you really don't care about that. You get him in your Blue Jays stacks, and right now, I mean, coming off injury, he's missed a couple days here and there. He's priced pretty cheap. I mean, DraftKings always gets him up there in nice matchups, but you can get him at a really nice discount most nights now on FanDuel, and I think he makes for a great tournament option because not a whole lot of these guys, despite how good they are, have the double dong upside that he does.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then we move on to three guys at the bottom that have been really similar all year: Chris Davis, Mike Napoli, and Chris Carter. That Davis has 12 home runs, Carter has 10, Napoli has 9, but none of them are hitting above 220 right now. And I mean, really similar to what you were saying about Encarnacion. It's easy to complain about the batting average, but when these guys have been in good situations, they've been okay with the power numbers, so they've been playable. Carter's probably been the most frustrating one, where he's had like a couple really strong games with multi-home runs, and then, I mean, a couple solo home runs here and there, and a ton of strikeouts. He's striking out 35% of the time. Davis, as we all know, strikes out a third of the time too, but he's been probably the most consistent of those three with 33 RBI on the season, 29 runs scored. The Orioles offense has cooled off a ton lately because he had some really nice numbers to start the year despite a low batting average, and there just hasn't been a lot of guys on base lately for the Orioles.
Yeah, that's been his big drawback, and that's still one of those teams that, people see them against a bad pitcher and they want to target them and stack them, get a bunch of them in their cash games. But at this point, like you mentioned, they've been struggling, and they're really not worth stacking in any regard outside of a tournament right now, except one guy that we'll get to in the outfield that's finally starting to turn it back around. Second base now. Don't need to tell you that Jason Kipnis has been hot. I mean, he's been one of the hottest hitters in the world over the past month or so. He's batting .333 on the season, and he's got 8 stolen bases, 27 RBIs, 41 runs scored. Gotta love that. D. Gordon, really hot start to the season and really slow little stretch there where he really struggled. But, I mean, he's not a guy who's going to continue to bat .350. He was batting .400 earlier in the season. He's not going to stay even near this. But, I mean, as much speed as he has, whenever he faces a bad righty, especially right now, his price is ridiculously low on FanDuel. So, I mean, he's an awesome cash game play any night against a righty right now because he's got just such big-time stolen base upside, if nothing else. I mean, you get on once, he is more than capable of stealing second base and third base.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all these guys at the top, even DJ LeMahieu, I've been playing quite a bit lately in Rocky stacks with him hitting second in the order right now and him just hitting .412 on batting average on balls in play, .351 overall. He doesn't really wow you in any category, but he's a guy that when they're in cores and the Rocky stacks going off, I mean, he can score runs, he can drive in runs. He's got 5 steals on the year, 3 home runs. I mean, there's not a lot to complain about with him right now. His price isn't overly outrageous because he doesn't have any like big upside in any of those categories. So I've been playing him a ton at second base lately with him and hitting second in the order.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you get those big bats behind him, and his value just shoots through the roof for sure. Brandon Phillips, another guy we said we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Still not hitting for much power, but at this point in your career, you're not really expecting that. .077 ISO, but what you like about him, a low strikeout rate, 11.9%. He's stolen 8 bases. He's hitting .308. Now that the Reds finally got smart and got Billy Hamilton the hell out of the leadoff spot and got him down batting 9th. Winnie's even in the lineup now, but Brandon Phillips getting on base. He's scoring runs with Votto, Frazier, guys like that behind him. And, he's missed a couple games this week, but you like to think that he's going to be healthy sooner rather than later. Or maybe you don't, because I know you and I and some others have been playing Ivan DeJesus in those days where he's been out, and he's been a really nice value.
Yep, definitely.
Colton Wong, another guy, up to 300 now. He's got some power, which is, of course, rare for middle infielders. Up to 7 homers, 27 RBIs, and 35 runs scored is what you really like. He's been moved up to the top of that Cardinals order, batting first most nights, so you got to like that. And then a guy who's actually been struggling, if you can say that for a guy who's batting .289, Jose Altuve. I mean, The guy's still good. He's just priced so highly because of his hot start and how good he was last year that, I'm not saying he's unplayable, but he's not a cash game option for me right now at his current price. Just the way that he's, I won't say struggling, but doesn't have much upside because he's not a home run hitter. He does have 17 steals, but it seems like those come in bunches. It's not like he steals one every 2 games.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's a matchup play right now. The problem with him is he's a much better hitter against lefties, and it's much tougher to steal against lefties.
Yep.
So like you're either sacrificing the batting average with him if you're playing him against a righty, hoping he gets on once or twice and picks up 2 or 3 steals, or you're playing him for the hitting upside, and he's not going to be able to steal as much because he's facing a lefty. So it's a really tough situation with him right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Guy right behind him, Logan Forsythe, and I guess I'll throw Brian Dozier in the mix here as well. Two guys you love to target against lefties. Dozier especially because he does have more upside, but Forsythe has been effective against lefties as well. I mean, those two guys, Dozier more of a tournament option in some of these scenarios because he's priced like it, but Forsythe continues to be a really nice value. You can just slot into your cash games anytime he's facing a southpaw right now. Down here at the bottom, Stephen Drew somehow up to 9 home runs, a guy that you really just don't ever play. I don't ever play, usually bats 7th or 8th. I think I might have played him once when he was batting 5th or 6th and he was men's salary, maybe twice. But, I mean, he's batting 173, 161 on balls in play, though, is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, 196 ISO you like, but like you said with the Yankees, this is it's a team effort here. And Stephen Drew, I mean, I don't know the last time he hit a home run with anyone on base. I want to say that
he hit 2 solo home runs in the same game the other night, didn't he?
Yeah, and I think I want to say 7 or 8 of his home runs are solo shots.
Yeah.
The bottom of that lineup is just not very good. And, I mean, when you bring up the 8-hitter, it's probably just getting a lot more pitches to hit because there's really no one they're worried about behind him. And then we'll talk some trash about Robinson Cano here real quick. 238 batting average now, 17.5% strikeout rate, a ISO of .089. Which is just absolutely terrible. Now below Chase Utley, below Ian Kinsler, who has no power. I mean, below everyone, really. Below DJ LeMahieu, even. So, I mean, this guy with no power, we said it a couple weeks ago, pretty soon he's going to be men's salary. He's within $100 of that right now on FanDuel. And he hit 2 doubles off Corey Kluber, and everyone jumped back on the wagon for his next 0 for 4 night the next night. But
yeah, he's been rough this year, really rough.
Yeah, still for me, no thanks. Not a guy I'm playing right now. Shortstop, there's been some interesting options right now, and a guy that I've been targeting a lot against lefties because he's got great splits, Aidini Hechavarria, up to 310 on the year. He's only got 2 stolen bases, which is kind of strange because he's a guy who's known for his speed, but 31 runs scored for a guy who's generally batting 8th. Is pretty good, especially in a bad lineup, because it's been the top of that order that's been producing. The middle hasn't been doing a whole lot, but he actually led off the other day against a lefty. Maybe that's something we're going to start seeing more, which is nice because he's priced fairly at most places where he makes for a great cash game option if he's facing a lefty and at the top of the order.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, his really only downfalls are that he's batting low in the order and he doesn't walk very much.
Yeah, and that lineup's just not good.
Yeah, that too. But like you said, if he's sitting at the top of the order, 1 or 2 spots in front of Stanton, you're in a much better spot than you are anywhere else in that order. Because, I mean, it's easy to say that only the top of the order has been producing, but it's really just Stanton. I mean, he's been hitting a home run like almost every day lately, it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, every time I think it's at least 3 times in a row against a lefty. I think that he's gone yard. So, yeah, I mean, it'd be nice. I feel like if I batted ahead of Stanton, I'd probably score quite a bit of runs right now. So. Either way. Troy Tulowitzki, a guy, was terrible for a while. He's back. Up to 196 ISO, 309 batting average, now at 7 home runs. Continue to get him in your tournaments, especially at Coors Field. He's back completely. I don't know what it was, mental, whatever it was, but he looks like the old Troy Tulowitzki, so you got to love that. Brandon Crawford's another guy, up to 40 RBIs for a Giants team that no one's talking about, but they're continuing to rake. Destroyed Matt Harvey the other day. Take that however you'd like. Maybe you think something's wrong with Harvey. Either way, you can't argue the fact that the Giants are hitting the ball really well. And Brandon Crawford, I mean, the guy's a lefty, but he hits lefties. He hits righties. Not a guy that ever really hit for average, but he's up to 287 this year. So he's a great, great play. Unfortunately, he's usually batting 6th or 7th. But still, with that type of upside, that's rare at shortstop. For that
yeah, and there's a lot of shortstops that just bat 7, 8, 9, too. So, I mean, even if he's hitting 6th, he's usually one of the higher batting shortstops outside of these top guys. So... he's a guy I've been playing quite a bit, even though his price has gone up. One guy that does hit really high in the order that hasn't really been doing much of anything is Starlin Castro. I mean, the Cubs have been scoring a decent amount of runs, but, I mean, he's been striking out almost 20% of the time. He's hitting 263, only 4 home runs, 4 steals, 27 RBI for a guy hitting right behind Chris Bryant and Anthony Rizzo right now is like, I mean, he's really struggling, but if he can come around and hit 280, 285 at some point, I mean, he can lock in a lot of runs with the guys in front of him.
Yeah, and right below him, moment of silence for Zach Cozart's season, which is now over
Yeah.
after shredding his knee. So unfortunate. I mean, obviously I'm biased on it. I'm a Reds fan, but I also was loving the Zach Cozart value train there for a while. He's by far his best offensive season that he's had since being
Yeah.
up. So we'll move back on to that next season. A guy who once again just continues to be terrible. Ian Desmond. They moved him up to the 2-hole for a while. Now Anthony Rendon is back. He's back near the bottom middle to low order. I mean, he's got 5 homers on this year, but 17 RBIs for an offense that hasn't been great. But I mean, they haven't been that bad that your 6 hitter should have 17 RBIs. And I mean, especially considering they refused to bat Bryce Harper third. He's batting 2 spots. He's been batting either 2 spots ahead of or behind Bryce Harper. He's not really scoring runs. He's got 28, but he's no RBIs, a 26% strikeout rate. I mean, he's a tournament only option, and even that only against a weak pitcher.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the way I've been using him. That's basically what I've been doing with Jimmy Rollins lately too.
Yeah. Neither guy really. Jimmy Rollins. I mean, at least you understand that he's in the tail end of his career, and I mean, at least he's doing other things. I mean, he's stealing bases.
He's got 7 home runs too, which is
Which
pretty
if you tell
interesting.
me beginning of the season that Jimmy Rollins at this point in the year is going to have 2 more home runs than Ian Desmond, I'm going to wonder how long Ian Desmond's been hurt.
Yeah, and you'd wonder the same thing about their batting averages.
Yeah.
If you would have told me that Jimmy Rollins would be hitting 30 points lower than Ian Desmond, I would have thought you were crazy too.
Yeah, exactly. So one of those things, I mean, we get it with him, but Ian Desmond, baffling. Another reason why DFS is about 1,000,000 times better than season long. You don't have to be stuck with waste of space like Ian Desmond on your roster. And speaking of the Nationals and speaking of guys who do not belong batting third, Escobar has the highest batting average of any third baseman. But his problem is .072 ISO, 2 home runs, just 15 RBIs. Just a guy that I don't care that he bats third. I mean, I don't think he should anyway, but I just don't play him because he's got 0 power. If he's not scoring runs, because I mean, it hasn't been a particularly good offense outside of Bryce Harper this year. So really, I mean, he's been priced like the guy who's had 2 5-hit games there for quite a while, and I can't pay his price tag for a guy that's got 0 upside.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, there's a lot of guys like that at the top of third base. Third base is such a weird position this year. There's a lot of average hitters at third base right now. I mean, Daniel Murphy's a guy that's having a decent season for the Mets, hitting .283, but 4 home runs and 1 steal with 16 runs scored. Not a guy you can really ever play outside of an elite matchup where he's underpriced.
Yeah, I mean, that's baffling. 16 runs scored and over 215 at-bats are played.
Yeah,
that's
right.
Crazy.
I know, especially when he's hitting .283. It'd be different if he was hitting .183. Okay, he's not scoring any runs. But when you're on base as much as he's been, he walks a decent amount too. And he's got a 33% on-base percentage, basically, .335. And he's only got 16 runs scored. It shows you how bad the Mets offense has been, honestly.
Yeah, horrible.
I mean, there's a lot of guys like that, though. Martin Prado's hitting .275 with 3 home runs and 0 steals. 23 and 23 for runs and RBI. Can't really play him very much unless you're doing a mini Marlin stack and hoping Stanton knocks him in. And then, so, I mean, we keep coming back to the same guys over and over again with Josh Donaldson, who's just absolutely raking. Chris Bryant, who is having a really strong RBI season for a guy that's about 30 or 40 plate appearances behind everybody else at third base. He's got 35 RBI and 33 runs scored already with 5 steals and 7 home runs. There's one other guy that I was going to... Oh, Nolan Arenado is a guy that is only hitting .274 right now, but having an absolutely fantastic season outside of that. 15 home runs and 47 RBI. You got to think his .257 batting average on balls in play comes up. He's going to play a ton more games in Coors. I think he's going to end up having a really, really nice year.
Yeah, and much like Tulowitzki, he started off pretty slowly as well. So it's been the past month or so that he's really getting it going. And then, of course, we're going to throw Manny Machado in there. He's one of my favorite young players. I love watching this kid. And he's got a decent price tag still. Homer again the other day. He's got 10 homers, 8 steals now, 26 RBIs, and 33 runs scored for a guy who's been batting either first or second primarily this season. ISO of nearly 200 is really encouraging for him right now, too. So showing some power, showing some speed, scoring some runs. And like we mentioned earlier, that's just not a very consistent Orioles offense. So that's pretty good numbers for him in a middling price range in that offense. Go down to the bottom here, talk about Luis Valbuena. He's your ultimate GPP play. He's got 12 home runs, a .210 ISO, but he bats .180. Another one of those guys. I mean, simply just not a good hitter, but he's a strong hitter. He has a ton of power.
Yep.
That's the only reason you ever play Louis Valpoint. I mean, if you play him, he gets you multiple hits. Good for you. You got really, really lucky.
Yeah.
So that's the wrap for third base. Move on to the outfield. Obviously, plenty to talk about there, as always. Looking at the top here, batting average wise, and I mean it's crowded up at the top. But surprisingly, if I had told you Nori Aoki would be leading the league in batting average, or at least among outfielders, among the league leaders, I should say. But 336. I mean, obviously the guy's got no power. But if you want a guy that's always going to put the ball in play, this is your guy. 8.6% walk rate, strikes out just 6.6% of the time. Lower than Michael Brantley, who we always talk about as the guy who always gives you good at-bats. And, I mean, obviously no power, but he's got 12 stolen bases, 30 runs scored. He's an interesting cheap option where he's actually cheap. But
yeah, he's a decent cash game play most of the time, especially on FanDuel where he's really cheap, and really anywhere. DraftKings prices him up pretty well and decent matchups, but I mean, he sits pretty low everywhere else, and he's a guy that's going to score you some points every day, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And especially, and like we mentioned, the Giants' offense is doing really well, and he's cheap. When you get cheap pieces of an offense like that, it's hitting, especially right-handed pitching so well. Go ahead and do that. Below these guys, Bryce Harper, don't even tell you about the season he's having. If you don't know, you probably aren't watching this podcast. And then next up, A.J. Pollock, the guy that we love to play in tournaments. This guy's having a hell of a year, and no one's talking about him. 8 homers, 42 runs scored, 28 RBIs, 14 stolen bases, 183 ISO, batting 326. He's like my favorite swerve of a guy. I mean, he's priced like Andrew McCutchen, and not quite Bryce Harper, but he's priced like a McCutchen, like a Nelson Cruz, kind of like a Michael Brantley type.
Yep.
And so no one ever plays him because he's not a household name, but I love targeting this guy.
Yeah, that's a good call. He's a great play most of the time. There's a lot of guys like that in the outfield this year that have just been having like really solid seasons that don't get the publicity that they probably should. I mean, one of my favorite guys, I mean, there's a ton of splits guys too in the outfield that are great. Like Anthony Goes and Rajai Davis hitting leadoff for the Tigers in their platoon have both been pretty productive this year in terms of stolen bases, on base percentage, everything. Especially with Miguel Cabrera finally heating up in that lineup over the last month or so. They've been really solid in terms of runs scored per game and stuff like that. Neither one of them is going to lead the league in runs scored in a platoon like that, but finding guys like that you can just plug into cash game lineups and stuff on a daily basis is always a really solid thing to look at.
Yeah, and another guy, like you mentioned, that's having a good season under the radar, Justin Upton. 12 homers, 39 runs scored, 38 RBIs, 12 stolen bases, batting 290. I mean, people were talking about how the Padres' offense is terrible, and it is, but that's not Justin Upton's fault. I mean, he's having a great season. Kemp's the one that's letting everyone down for the most part. Will Myers was hurt, finally back now, but, you know, Justin Upton's just been doing what he's always been doing, crushing left-handing pitching, not being too bad against righties either. So he's another sneaky tournament option that nobody ever seems to be on just because, you know, the offense around him isn't that good. Yeah,
definitely. Plenty of other guys we can talk about in the outfield here. One guy that's having a decent season for the Brewers that's gone a little bit under the radar is Ryan Braun. I mean, he's only hitting 267, but some massive upside with him. 13 home runs, 41 RBI, and what's been a pretty bad lineup, 6 stolen bases. I mean, he's not MVP Ryan Braun, but he's been a pretty quality play considering almost no one ever plays him unless it's like a really bad lefty playing the Brewers or something, which almost hurts him even more because the rest of the Brewers are terrible against lefties. So there's never anyone on base in those games is the problem. I've played him in a couple of those situations, and yeah, you get one solo home run from him or whatever every once in a while, but when there's no one on base in front of him, it makes it really hard to accumulate points. A lot of the same problems we were talking about with Jose Abreu.
Yeah, I mean, the worst thing is when your top-notch guy that you paid up for hits a double, leadoff double even in an inning, and just sits there the entire time and doesn't score. I mean, you're getting a lot better value with a guy, a not quite as good hitter in a better lineup, a better offense.
Yep.
I'll make fun of Jay Bruce here real quick down at the bottom. 213 batting average, 188 ISO. He's got 9 homers, and 4 stolen bases. But I mean, he's just not been good, and he's been horrible against lefties. That's no surprise though. He's been pretty bad against lefties in general. And then Matt Joyce, we got to give a shout out to the worst qualified batter in the outfield. Batting 183 with a 136 ISO. He's got 4 home runs, but I think I played him once this year, and it was part of a Angels stack.
Yeah, that's about the amount of times I've played him. Also,
Yeah.
maybe one more time than that in an extra Angel stack because I was loving trying to get Pujols in there all the time when he was really cheap because he was struggling, and then he heated up and his price went up immediately because I think he heated up with like 3 home runs in 2 days or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think he had like 6 over the span of 10 days or something.
Yeah, that was a crazy streak he was on for a while there.
Yeah, he hasn't even completely cooled off yet either. So
No.
go ahead and keep. He's still not even that expensive. So get yourself some Abreu Pujols, but let's leave Matt Joyce out of it. Do yourself a favor and save your money there. With that, that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out our projections, cheat sheets, all of our great new content at dailyfantasycafe.com. We'll see you guys next time.